Here we go.
What's going on, guys? Today we're going to be talking about Joker Folie à Deux. Todd Phillips returns to Gotham with Joaquin Phoenix, as inevitably there was going to be a sequel titled Joker Folie à Deux, or simply Joker 2. The original grossed over $1 billion, and for a good stretch of time, it was the highest grossing R-rated film of all time, until Deadpool and Wolverine dethroned it. On top of that, it won some Oscars, and Joaquin Phoenix won Best Actor for Arthur Fleck. You get that much success, and of course the execs are going to want to dig deeper in that pot of gold, and unfortunately, the way the first film was made and the vibe of it, you could tell there was no intention of there ever being a sequel. It concludes in a way where the viewer gets to play around with whatever they want to interpret the ending of that movie, so following it up kind of has to give you an answer to those questions, so the ability to have your own understanding and resolution just gets muddied. Because whether or not you like Joker 2 or not, it's impossible to disconnect the open end of the original to a concrete answer that is given in the sequel. And tragically, so many movies that don't require sequels inevitably end up getting sequels, and Joker just slips right into that list. So in this film, they introduced Lady Gaga as Harley Quinn, and I'm not gonna lie, in A Star is Born, she delivered a strong performance, but I don't like her interpretation of Harley Quinn because honestly, it doesn't feel like Harley Quinn at all. She's just a fan in this film. Margot Robbie is actually really good in Birds of Prey, and even in the bad Suicide Squad movie, she was like the only good thing about that movie. I fully buy her interpretation of Harley Quinn because she has her own identity, and because of Margot Robbie's massive popularity, it's become synonymous with the live version of Harley Quinn. And to be candid, because of how much representation there is of Harley Quinn and obviously Joker, who is hugely popular, seeing them together isn't really that exciting anymore. The idea behind this movie, which is literally written in the title, is called Folie à Deux, which is a French term meaning dual psychosis, a psychosis shared by two people. Which I get it, it could potentially be an interesting idea that they could play along with. But the musical aspect is the part that really was a strange element to add to the movie, at least for me. Some of the best movies ever made are so weird and bizarre, and I'm not saying the original is one of the best movies of all time. I really enjoyed that movie, but it has its flaws. But that interpretation of Joker, because we'd never seen it before, makes it that much more enjoyable. And because of that, it felt like an earnest attempt, regardless of if it took inspiration from Taxi Driver. But Joker Folie à Deux just really feels like it's trying to be weird for weird's sake, and honestly, that's when a movie really loses my interest. And the musical aspect is kind of the crux of the film for me. I have nothing against musicals. How La La Land is spectacular, and I think that film adds the musical element beautifully. But the elephant in the room is that the musical aspect doesn't amount to anything in the story. They hold no true value other than feeding into the Joker's madness. Like, if you want to interpret it that way, that's fine, but I didn't feel like it was engaging enough to make it feel like those scenes actually mattered. The sequences literally feel so tacked on and often felt so jarring because when we're about to get any little bit of plot, it changes to a musical bit and then any buildup that you had vanishes after that. The movie is 2 hours and 20 minutes long, and this plot literally could have been told in a 60-minute short, which tells you how overbearing the musical aspect of it was. Also, the screenplay felt so unpolished, almost like a draft script is what made it to the final cut. There was like no kinetic flow between scenes to transition. It felt like things just happen and happen until the credits roll. Like, it was to the point that the most frustrating part of the movie was that half of the movie was this courtroom drama and it didn't matter. There's a verdict that goes unfinished, but when the Joker gets caught, it's like we're put right in the beginning of the movie. Like, he's just back at the asylum with the other prisoners. So what was the point of the case then if there's not gonna be any consequences? Some form of exposition saying, like, he's gotta go on the electric chair or something. Nothing is told to the audience after that. Like, that literally made half of the movie feel redundant, and also the courtroom drama stuff, it felt like more of a slog and just uninteresting. Fact is that a movie is at its best when the credits roll and it leaves you with something to think about or discuss. Essentially, the memorability and lasting impression is so strong that you just don't forget about the movie as soon as you walk away from the theater. And in that same vein, the worst case scenario is when a movie kind of ends and you don't feel interested enough to even mention anything because of how forgettable it was. The latter, sadly, being the case for this film. This is a strange film to talk about in a traditional sense. Like, some of the pros is that it's shot very well. The environment and world of the first film was captured just as well here. You still get that grungy, smelly aesthetic of Gotham. In general, I feel like more recently, the quality of presentation of films has definitely increased, least, even in movies that I don't love. One of the more recent examples that I can think of is The Watchers. It's a movie that I didn't click with necessarily, but the cinematography was absolutely gorgeous in that movie, and definitely the most memorable part about it. Todd Phillips really made sure that the film kept the same look, and it took me no time to re-immerse myself into his world. I also really liked the use of vivid colors in the more fantastical moments of the movie to contrast the darker, more grounded and real look in the rest of the movie. And the performances are still solid. Joaquin Phoenix slips right back into the role of Joker, and he was able to easily distinguish the characters of Joker and Arthur Fleck. As the Joker, he has this finesse, ego, and just general aura that forces you to pay attention to him. And at the same time, as Arthur, he's still the meek, troubled, and broken man that we already knew. And like I said before, Lady Gaga has proven she can act, and she does a decent enough job here as the super fanatic that fantasizes about her fairy tale ending with her celebrity crush, the Joker. But the musical aspect entirely felt more prevalent solely because Lady Gaga is in the film. Like, yeah, the set designs were cool and creative. A few tried to have some thematic resonance, but it just felt like a lot of eye candy just to pad the runtime. I'd honestly say the best thing that Lady Gaga could do is to stay away from these types of roles because she's being pocketed in these like musical roles and do roles that can be taken more seriously and showcase more of her acting ability. And the thing is, this movie has a problem where the characters that it's talking about kind of take a backseat and become more of an afterthought than anything. This being a follow-up to a movie that was so heavily focused on the characters of Arthur and Joker feels so bizarre because it almost feels so unfocused. The original, I felt, had a hyper focus on Arthur, and while some might argue that that was overwritten, this is a perfect example of how that's preferable to underwriting and essentially forgetting the character that the whole movie's about. The thing is, this movie for a good chunk of its runtime feels so redundant because it just serves to recap a lot of the big moments of the original movie. It's egregious and exhausting because it feels like the movie isn't confident enough to create its own identity, so instead it spends its time trying to enamor you with the original. And there's proof that this could have been a much better movie because there's hidden gem moments that feel very reminiscent of great movie making, but they're hidden under a lot of gunk. Like, I was actually very invested in the relationship between the guard and Arthur because it wasn't expected, and you could tell they had some level of respect for each other. Because of that connection, the payoff of them going cold on Arthur because he rags on them on live TV feels justified. The reintroduction of Gary was easily the most compelling part for me. He reflected perfectly the consequences and recoil of Arthur's actions since they indirectly affected him and many others and ostensibly harmed them. It taught Arthur a lesson and almost cracked him. Even the climax of him finally admitting to himself that the Joker persona is just an idealistic version of himself that isn't realistic or sustainable. It was a very raw moment in the movie, and because of that, I found it to be actually very effective. But it bums me out that the writing for Arthur Fleck's character arc just dissolves into him being a simp for Harley. Like, it's not enough the trauma and ultimate realization that he went through in the original movie. He needed to want a girlfriend. Honestly, that was so lame, and I didn't like the approach either of Harley Quinn essentially puppeteering or manipulating Joker either. It just didn't sit well with me. For most of the movie, all other elements were trying to push Arthur to be the representation of the Joker. The idea of the Joker in the original movie was pressed out of Arthur Fleck's character through trauma and most other personal stakes in that movie. Here, it feels like everything around him is what's making him have to be that shape, and ultimately it bottles up and explodes in his core, as he says he can no longer continue to be that symbol. And I think ultimately that's what makes the conclusion that fandom at its worst can be as ugly as getting rid of him entirely, despite the fact that most of the movie they were extremely supportive of him. So it's very fitting that the two most loyal people are the ones that ended up abandoning him when he no longer met their expectations. I found it to be very interesting commentary because of notorious examples like Selena and John Lennon that were infamously killed in similar ways. So I appreciated that aspect of what the movie was trying to say. It's just it took the longest possible route to get to that conclusion. Ultimately, this follow-up didn't have nearly the gas to match the original, and at least to me, it doesn't have much rewatch value at all. I felt like overall it just didn't have the essence or the modesty that the original had in spades.
You wouldn't get it.
Yeah, I didn't get it this time. But that's it for me. I'd appreciate a thumbs up, subscribe, and sincerely yours, Anthony.